this is increasingly the way that actors should go, and they should be better equipped for it to create their own work, because it can be many things, but one of them, I would argue, is it's joyful.
Hi Mark, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Thank you for coming on the channel today. I always get people to start to talk about themselves first, to kind of tell us who you are. So tell us who you are. Are you a writer, an actor, director, etc.? Tell us about you.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought of myself as a actor and always wanted to be an actor. But as the years went on, I discovered actually not so much a necessity as a passion for writing my own work, and then ultimately producing it as well. The only thing I'm not really is a director, because I don't know, I just kind of don't have the time for it so much. And I've directed a few pieces, but I don't think that's where my passion lies, actually. So yeah, I mean, primarily an actor, but also a writer and producer.
Okay, so like you're an accidental producer in some ways because you've had to do it yourself?
Yes. Well, in a way, I just found that I was the right person to do it. I mean, I've worked with producers in the past, and I have nothing but praise for them. But somebody put it to me very rightly one night in a bar and said, you know, why don't you approach such and such a venue? And I said, well, I don't have a producer at the moment. And they said, well, why don't you just pick up the phone? Because you are probably the person who's got the most passion and understanding of the project. So you are the best person to speak to that venue. And then it just went on from there that I started self-producing, and I wouldn't really want it to be any other way now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think from my point of view as well, sometimes you just naturally and instinctively go, actually, I should just produce it myself, because you can kind of cut to the chase pretty quick, can't you? I guess.
Yeah, and I think a lot of producers are a bit like spread betters, that they take quite a few projects on and they think, well, let's see which one flies. And that means that they're not always really galvanized and pushing your particular project as much of the time as you would want them to. Whereas if you're doing it yourself, there are no excuses. You know, you have to pick up the phone, you have to make the emails, you have to go and meet people, and it's good to do that. It gives you more connection and control over your product.
Yeah. So I've got you on the channel to talk about making biographical work, because your portfolio is filled with shows about prolific people. There are 3 or 4. Could you maybe tell us about those ones that you do?
Yeah, well, the first one I did was about Patrick Hamilton, who was a novelist primarily in the 20s, 30s, 40s. He wrote Rope and Gaslight and Hangover Square. And from there, I did a show about Quentin Crisp called Naked Hope. Well, it's called Quentin Crisp Naked Hope because a producer said, you've got to have his name in the title, dummy. Because I was just going to call it Naked Hope. And then I made a 2-hander about Frankie Howerd and Frankie Howard's life partner, Dennis Hamer. I played Dennis in the piece. A lot of people assume it's a one-man show about Frankie Howerd, and it's not. And all those 3 seem to come along very in a similar time span. I think they were all conceived and created in about 18 months or 2 years. And then quite a bit later, and more recently, I made a solo about Derek Jarman. So, yeah, there are 4 pieces at the moment. Yeah.
And then how do you identify, is there some sort of running theme here? You know, do you look back and go, okay, these 4 guys, they have this in common? Is there something you've realized after a while, you go, oh, that's really interesting, I seem to have chosen a pattern here? Or is there no pattern? Is there any sort of, you know, why these guys?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I'm really having to think, actually, because it's a great question. Two things are really at the front of my mind, just feeling my way through this right now. I mean, first of all, they've all got fantastic language. I think that was a big kind of starting point for me. You know, I read, for example, The Naked Civil Servant, which is Quentin Crisp's autobiography, and I was howling with laughter on the first page. And then I was starting to really feel sorry for him as well. And yeah, I just found it incredibly moving. I went through a very, very awful period in my life, almost exactly 10 years ago. I was with a girlfriend for 15 years. And in the last year of that, it became a menage a trois with another girl. So there were three of us in this crazy chaos, which was very, 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 very unstable and quite violent. I don't talk about this very much, not because I'm embarrassed or awkward about it. I don't know, it never comes up, but you made me go there. Yes, it was quite violent. Not on my behalf, I was the recipient of it. And when all of that kind of finally imploded or exploded or whatever, I don't know, but it all collapsed very acrimoniously, and nobody involved in that has ever spoken to the other people involved in it ever again. I mean, their way of dealing with it was to cut me off and never speak to me again, even to the point of literally blanking me in the street. So that was very, very hard for me to recover from. And it took probably about 2 years to do that.
Right.
Also, in that 2-year period, a lot of other things it just kept coming at me. One of my closest friends hanged himself. It was also the period when I was completely without any direction as an actor. You know, everything, the phone, you know, we talked about the phone ringing. The phone really, really wasn't ringing. And I think, yeah, for quite a while in that period, I was on a knife edge, really, of either really recovering and becoming a stronger person or going under and ending my life. And I really genuinely wasn't sure which way it was going to go. And on one of the worst days that I ever had, I happened to see a video of Quentin Crisp on YouTube, and it took me away from the despair that I was going through, and sort of I felt very much actually that my life had ended.
Right.
At the age of 35, I thought, well, that's it. So I'm just kind of waiting for the end, really. And there's a video of Quentin. It's the first thing that they ever filmed of him, and he's sitting in his flat in Chelsea. And he was in a very similar position in his life, although he was quite a bit older than me. He was in his late 60s. Right. And, you know, he's this beautiful line. He said, I've come to the end of my personality. And so his attitude was, I'm just going to, like a Beckett character, I'm just going to wait for it to end. And there's this ticking clock in the background. And I thought, well, boy, that's me, definitely. Like a cross between him and Miss Havisham, really. Yeah. And the difference between him and me was that he was very funny and witty about it. I mean, you could sense that there was some despair there, but he was very, very witty. You know, that he said, if at first you don't succeed, failure may be your style. You know, that he could joke about it. Because I'd been to a very high-powered school in Sheffield. I'd then been to Cambridge and played Hamlet and all of that. So, you know, the shock of Civvy Street and the normal world was huge anyway. Right. And I put far too much expectation on myself to achieve in life. And I mean, to me, Cambridge is like, you know, if you go there and you're not prime minister within 5 years of leaving, you should just jump off Peachy Head because you failed, you know. Somebody said to me recently, who was at Oxford, said, "Yeah, it's a very damaging place."
Yeah.
And I sort of know what that means. I've got a lot of plus points about it, but yeah, it in a way it did me some damage that I never really realised I was dealing with.
Yeah.
So I think Quentin was, you know, somebody who I identified in that sense in terms of the loneliness that I was feeling. So he was a little bit like a comrade in arms in that sense.
Right.
I think Patrick Hamilton, because Patrick Hamilton lived in a sort of a ménage à trois with two women, and which was you know, no more pleasant than mine had been, and also he you know, he had this kind of over expectation thing about his life. I think that he coped with alcohol and other distractions. And I suppose at the time that pieces were conceived, I could see that Patrick Hamilton was a bit like the way my life could have gone. And Quentin Crisp was more like the way my life probably ought to go. So it was, in a sense, communing with different aspects of myself and trying to make sense of their lives and my own simultaneously, in the hope that this would also have some kind of applicability to strangers and that they might see some of their own lives in it. I mean, again, what I like about all the characters that I've played is that they get right down to the marrow. They've had very extreme experiences in life. So, you know, they're not going to waste your time. If you play them or you watch the pieces, you're going to hear something that hopefully is, you think, oh God, thank God somebody really said that. I've been thinking that for years, but have never dared to voice it.
Yeah.
So I think that they certainly the first two I did were parts of me, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of all of the pieces, to a greater or a lesser extent. It's something about me that I want to explore as much as something about them. I think the other thing is that they were all, to some degree, outsiders. I mean, three of the characters are gay, which I'm not, although, as I've often said, I'm kind of colorblind with sexuality, really. I don't think about it very much. I anticipate and expect a world one day where it will be of no more relevance than what color your eyes are. But for them to have been different, so to speak, in earlier decades, especially with somebody like Quentin, that was very tough because it was very excluding and isolationary. And what it meant, I think, is a little bit like a hermit in a cave. You have a hell of a lot of time to think and formulate what you really think about life and your other human beings from whom you feel so distant. And so, as with, you know, say Derek Jarman, the language that they've left behind is just incredibly rich and deep and fascinating, because I think of not being part of any mainstream.
Yeah.
Being very much on the outside. I mean, my starting point with Jarman was, I mean, first of all, I was very afraid of him, because when I was a teenager, Jarman was dying very publicly in the papers and on television, and he did look horrendous towards the end, as did Freddie Mercury. And those images were really seared on my mind as an adolescent, and I found them very, very frightening. And so I didn't want to really go near Derek Jarman at all. I was aware he was this interesting guy, but I got this sort of distance from him. I read recently that Alan Bennett said that he saw Jarman in the theatre in the 90s. And he ducked down so that he didn't have to, he was frightened of shaking hands with Jarman. He didn't want to have to do that. And I felt a bit the same. I just found it really frightening. It seemed to be so much about death and dying horribly. And so I'm an inveterate, nosy diary reader. I love real life diaries. And I knew that Jarman had written diaries for the last 5 years of his life, and I'd never read them. And it was about 3 years ago. I thought, oh, come on, Mark, read them. You know, they probably won't be that depressing. And they were beautiful and inspiring and funny and, yes, frightening, but courageous and vibrant and alive. And again, so I thought, well, there's this incredible language here. And my first thought was, I bet the National Theatre's got a 10-year option on this. I'll never be able to get near it. And to my amazement, when I got in touch with his estate, they said, oh, we'd love someone to do something with it. Yeah, so it was remarkably easy, actually. Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm making a show myself at the moment, inspired by the life of Bobby Kennedy, who's an American politician. And some of the things that you've said actually rung true with me in the fact that I think that it's really useful if you find an affinity with that person in some way, in whatever shape or form.
Yeah.
And then also to feel that they still have a relevance in the world, that's really key as well. I've personally found. And then, like you say, you can go back to the language and how do you shape it for the world today, etc. And hopefully some will come, not only learn maybe about history or learn about that person, but also go back and go, oh, that's touched me. So in terms of your four, isn't it? Four shows that you've made, yeah. Where do you frame somebody's life? How do you go, right, I'm going to start with the birth, or do you literally just wait before you start framing it? Is there a pattern in what you've made, or?
I think, I mean, first of all, probably it's important to say that I had a really formative experience when I was 19. I came down to London because my girlfriend at the time was a drama student. And so I came down from Sheffield, and we were like super, super theatre hungry. And we went to see, on the Saturday, we saw a matinee and an evening, 2 different big glossy West End shows. And then on the Sunday afternoon, pissing rain, and she said, there's this one-man show about Kenneth Williams, but and we were in Sidcup, and I said, where is it? She said, it's in a place called the King's Head in Islington. And we trailed up there, soaked, drowned rats, and we went to see this show. And at the end of it was performed by a guy called David Benson. And he'd had a real hit with it at Edinburgh, and he was now starting to tour it. But at the end of the performance, I stayed in my seat. The audience were leaving, and Helen turned to me and she said, are you all right? And I remember I slowly pointed at the stage, the empty stage with the chair on it, and I said, I want to do that. And of course, it took me many years to actually do that, but that, I just thought the intimacy and the connection of it was so much stronger than the shows I'd seen the day before, with all respect to those shows. So from, I think I'd always had an interest in solo stuff and biographical stuff, but a lot of it didn't really work for me. I thought, you haven't thought about why this might be relevant. And the cliches of, here I am in the dressing room, and I'm just about to give my final performance, but I'm going to tell you my life story. And I didn't like that very much. I think it can be made to work, but not without great imagination. So I always thought it would be important to start it in, just not necessarily feel you have to pick it up on day one of their life or the last day of their life, which are the kind of what ordinary go-to points. So, for example, with Quentin, he's talking to the audience, and it's sort of about 2/3 of the way through his life. I mean, he does some flashing back, and then the play moves forward to the later period of his life. When you meet Derek Jarman, he's on the shingle at Prospect Cottage with Howard's End, which is the Frankie Howard play. That's set in 2009. So I think you can go in anywhere, really. because one of the great things about this form is that there are no rules. You can do whatever you like. I think it's very easy to be hackneyed. So, you know, what a friend of mine called Wikipedia with lights, you know, that you just that you feel a slave to the chronology of the character's life.
Yeah.
You don't have to. And I mean, like with Patrick Hamilton, there were bits of his life that didn't particularly interest me. Right. I couldn't find an interesting way of dramatizing his interest in communism. So I didn't, you know, but there's only so much that you can fit in anyway. Yeah. And I'm aware that, I mean, because I've had it like with Derek Jarman, that some people have said, oh, you know, you didn't do the such and such bit about his life. And I said, well, I know, but it'd be 5 hours long if I did, you know, and that you have to pick a line. But I think advice-wise, I think you've got immense freedom. I mean, always good perhaps to go with a moment in their life that seems very symbolic or significant, a key day. But you know, that could be anywhere. So for example, I've spoken to you earlier in this interview about, you know, a key day in my life when I was very despairing. But that was when I was 36. You know, I think if you were going to dramatize my life, I'd probably start on that day, because that's the day when I decided to change and be a different human being.
Yeah.
So I think you want to identify the most significant moment, or one of the most significant moments in the person's life, and then maybe work from there. And equally feel that you can tear that up and start again. You know, I worked with a very good vocal coach once, and she talked in a slightly different context about what she calls ghost roads. And I think you have ghost roads when you're creating a piece, that you walk down a certain path, and at some point you think, right, okay, this is not taking me in the right place, but I'm glad I walked down it.
Yeah.
You know, I found something out by walking down it. I think the other thing that so many people give up with and get frustrated with when they're creating their own work is, you know, why isn't it working? And it should be happening by now. And I've written the beginning 18 times and I'm still not happy with it. Well, carry on, just keep going. One of the greatest assets you need in this kind of endeavor is just tenacity. Just tenacity. You know, I had immense trouble having written Quentin. I had immense trouble getting the rights to do it, because I was very naive the first time I did it, and I didn't think about the rights, and I wrote it and then checked on the rights. Right. And I had to put it in a drawer for about a year before, you know, some light emerged through the clouds. And then at that point, a producer said to me, okay, I'll produce it. There's just one thing. I want you to rewrite the entire second half. Because it's in two halves. There's no interval, but there's two distinct halves to it. Yeah. And he just said, I think the second half it's too much like the first half. It's too samey. I think you should go a different route. Here's the route I think you should go. So at any one of those points, you could have given up and said, "Oh, you know, solve this. It's just too much. It's not meant to be," and so forth. But no. Keep going. Be tenacious.
It's almost like what part of their life interests you, but also what is dramaturgically interesting. I guess that's the trick. Yeah. To frame, and there's no one way. There's no fast track, is it? It's kind of an instinct in some ways. Yeah. So what are have you found that there are certain entry points now that you go into when you go into research mode? What are your kind of like go-to points? And then is there some sort of pattern over the years now? You know, if somebody was going to do that, what would you say? Go and check out these things, or, you know, any little gems that you've learned over the years?
Well, you certainly need your due diligence. You know, I think you should do all manner of research, and if it's a biographical piece, if there's anyone to contact that can talk to you, then so much the better. But at the end of the day, although you should do all of that, it is, in my experience, of relatively limited usefulness. So, for example, Frankie Howerd wrote an autobiography, but it's a load of baloney because he's so secretive and self-guarding that the book tells you absolutely nothing. And Dennis, who was his partner in every sense of the word for 34 years, gets one paragraph in the book where Frankie says, I have this wonderful manager called Dennis. I have to be careful with him, though, because he's got a real eye for the ladies. I mean, that's exactly how paranoid Frankie Howerd was. So, you know, your research is only going to take you so far. Likewise, I've found that if you meet people who knew the subject very well, they often have, they're too close to that person to be able to help you in a way. And they are understandably very proprietorial. I met someone who knew Quentin Crisp really well, and he just spent ages telling me why he didn't like the show. You know, it wasn't enough of this, it wasn't enough of that. Oh, your voice wasn't this, wasn't that? And I thought, you know, I'm never going to be able to please you. So I think you have to do the research for sure, but then really think, well, okay, but where does that take me, and how does that relate to me? What is there within me? What am I interested in this person? Yeah, take it from there. So, for example, you know, Frankie's reticence in that book became a major theme in the play, that there are several where him and Dennis are playing out for the audience scenes from their life. And there are bits where Dennis plays other people like Peter Cook. And they're having a chat in a bar, and Peter Cook says, oh, I think there's someone there wants your autograph. And Frankie turns around and he goes, oh, no, that's just Dennis, that's nobody. And when we performed that on Sunday afternoon at the Museum of Comedy in Covent Garden, on that line, the front row all went, you know, that denial of your closest partner.
Right.
So, yeah, I think the other thing is I think I, like a lot of people, I tend to have quite good ideas about midnight after a few glasses of wine. And you scribble something down and you think, where the hell did that come from? You know, quite often you try the sober test on what you've written, and you think, no, that's rubbish actually. But sometimes you do write some amazing things down and you think, gosh, where did that come from? And a lot of those things have ended up in my pieces. They're kind of like curveball-y things because, again, you don't really want to be stuck doing too sort of slavish a version of somebody's life. You want to do something that I'm moving more in the direction of being much more abstract and impressionistic, and away from literalism. More and more so, I think, actually. I mean, you and I have a director in common, Sarah Louise Young. Yeah. And when I was doing the Jarman piece, I said to her, this can be anything we like, but it can't be like any of the others that I've done. And she said, yeah, I know what you mean. And so I think the other thing I've noticed is that, because quite a lot of people make one show, whether it's biographical or not, they make one show, and whether it is successful or not, that's kind of it. A little bit, you know, like everyone's got a great novel in them and all of that. And maybe people have a show in them. What I found, though, is if you do find the desire and the opportunity to press on and keep making work, I mean, you do build up a well of experience, and you become, I think, a little bit more daring. You know, so that although I'm still touring the first two that I've made, I mean, I'm not the person who made those shows anymore. Right. And so I think that's good, that you have some evolution and some development. Yeah.
So it's interesting what you're saying. So in some ways, it's a case of consume all of the regular stuff, like say biographies, films, et cetera, but at some point you've got to go, right, that's done. Now, what do I want to make? And all sorts of things like where you're living, where you are at the time, your age, your experience, etc., etc. Like you say, you wouldn't have, if you were to remake the Quentin Crisp show now, it'd probably be completely different because you're a different person and you might interest, as it were. Yeah. So to just last thought then, let's say I am about to do a show about somebody prolific. What's the advice you would give me? Just give me some stock advice. Like what have you learned now? Like, go right, watch out for that. Look out for this one. Don't do that. I mean, obviously, we're not saying everybody has to completely follow Mark's advice, but are there some things that you go, be careful of that one, apart from meeting their friends, obviously?
Well, I think you've got to be really, really clear and honest with yourself about why you're doing it. Because I think sometimes people make a show because they think, oh, it'd be really good to do that, wouldn't it? And they haven't really thought through why they want to do it. I remember somebody said to me, it'd be a great time to make a show about Robin Williams, and all of that. I think you've got to be really honest about why you're doing it, because it's very hard and it's very lonely.
Yeah.
I think it's important to be realistic about that and stress that it's a great many hours sitting in front of a computer on your own. And in fact, the silence and the solitude are absolutely essential to the quality of the writing and the acting, because you're going to be performing somebody alone on the stage, and somebody who, hopefully, if it's any good as a piece of writing, is really looking in the mirror and saying, who the hell am I? What am I about? And you need to have cultivated a great deal of solitude and stillness and silence, and gone through a lot of that in order to be able to reach interesting places with these people. And then, of course, you get all the problems that may happen. You may have problems with the rights. You may have problems with funding. The writing process might get bogged down. So you'd have to really, really, really want to do it. But if you've established that, yeah, you really want to do it, and you're not going to give up, then just move heaven and earth to make it happen. Don't worry too much about where it's going to be staged or who it's going to be produced by. So, for example, the Jarman show cost £3,500 to make, which is pretty paltry, really. I mean, I would think anybody could set that aside if they were really determined to make something happen. And it's made its money back pretty quickly and can now make a profit. Right. But yeah, there'll be lots of voices, internal and external, along the path telling you to give up, or maybe it's not meant to be, and you just have to push through those, and also not do it. Please don't make a piece. It's my advice anyway. Don't make a piece in expectation of anything. Don't expect that people are going to like it, much less that it's going to win awards or run for 100 performances or whatever. You do it because it's a piece of creativity. You've probably chosen a subject who had some artistry or expressive depth to them, and you want to match what they're doing with your own expressiveness. Derek Jarman said the apprentice should one day outdo the master. And I've thought about that increasingly with the stuff that I do, where you can't just do something because you're enthralled to this person and you think, oh, they were amazing. You want to think, well, how are they going to change and shape me? What are they doing for me? And then perhaps finally, the thing that might help to keep you going is that when you get out there and you finally do it, whether it is in a tiny pub theatre or a big regional giant like the Crucible or Stephen Joseph in Scarborough or in the West End or wherever, but wherever you do it, you're going to really, really connect with people and possibly in some sense change their lives, because presumably you're going to do what I do, which is to disregard the fourth wall entirely and speak every single word to the audience. In the, what is it now, 7-8 years I've been doing this, the things that people have told me in the bar afterwards, or in an email or a phone call, are absolutely astonishing. That they pour their heart out to you. They tell you that something that the character has said has changed their life or has made them reassess something. And that is an astonishing feeling. And I am healthily addicted to it. I'll tell you how much I love it. If it stopped tomorrow, I wouldn't complain or moan, because I've had such amazing moments of very, very deep connection with complete strangers that to want more is natural and understandable, but could be conceived of as a bit greedy. So I've had my fill. I'd be happy to have lots more, but if it stopped tomorrow, I would just say, well, what a ride that's been. How lucky, and how glad I am that I didn't get sucked into the conventional acting path that I was on, where I was very, very unhappy. I did a touring production, for example, of Hay Fever, the Noel Coward play with Bill Kenwright. And I remember being so deeply depressed doing it, because it wasn't fulfilling me in any way. The only production I really enjoyed being in was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which I did with Matthew Kelly at Trafalgar Studios a few years ago. That was very fulfilling, but it was doing that I thought, well, I just don't want to be in plays that aren't fulfilling or creative for me. So write your own. And luckily for me, that path, though it is lonely, and there are not that many people out there holding a torch to guide you, there are some, and I really salute what you're doing in that regard, to try and light the way for people, because as you have been saying to me, this is increasingly the way that actors should go, and they should be better equipped for it to create their own work, because it can be many things, but one of them I would argue is it's joyful. It is joyful.
Yeah. Which is a really great note to end on. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Mark. And I think I'll get you back one day, and you can come and talk to us about traveling as a solo performer. I think I'd suddenly come up with another interview. That'll be another lovely chat to talk about packing up your suitcase, getting on a train, and off you go. We'll definitely have you back.
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. Nice to meet you. Take care.
Take care.